Hey there, in this video, I'm going to show you how to make pathways. So pathways is a jelly roll friendly quilt pattern, perfect for quilters who love to make triangle quilts. Pathways is a happy medium of piecing and color improv, and it uses just 2 jelly rolls. You can make it as shown, or you can experiment with your own layout. To make pathways, you'll start by choosing 3 color groupings. Then you'll piece your strip sets from your jelly rolls. Next, you'll cut triangles from each strip set. Then, once you have your triangles all cut out, you'll lay out your triangles following my assembly diagram, or you can experiment with your own layout, creating your own pathways of color through your quilt. Once you have your layout perfected, you'll assemble your pathways quilt by sewing the triangles into rows and then sewing the rows into the quilt top. Now, a word of caution before you jump into making your own pathways quilt. Lining up these stripes can be a bit tricky. Now, it's totally doable, and I will show you exactly how as I walk you through this tutorial. Visit the linked blog post for more step-by-step photos and more pattern tidbits like the exact colors I'm using, plus more color and design inspiration. To make pathways, you'll need 2 jelly rolls, but you, of course, can make your own jelly roll strips. The first thing you're going to do is open up your jelly rolls and sort into 3 color groupings. To get myself started, I just opened up my jelly roll and put everything out in kind of a color order from light to dark. Now, if you're following the way I put my own pathways together, here's how I did my color groupings and how I lay out each strip. So I did 3 color groupings. The first one is olive, the next one is turquoise, and the last one is blue. Now that you've got your strip sets all sorted into your groups, our next step is to piece our strip sets. Choosing enough strips to make one strip set, lay out your strips from darkest to lightest, or whichever order you've decided. And as a tip, to prevent any warping, alternate the direction you sew your seams when piecing each strip set. Now you're going to repeat this process to make a total of 13 strip sets. For a bigger quilt, you can always make more strip sets. So at this point, I've got my strip sets all sewn together. I made 4 strip sets in my olive grouping, 4 in my blue grouping, and then 7 in my turquoise. And I just decided to make 7 of my favorite one. No more thought than that. It's just my favorite colors. All right, so now that you've got all of your strip sets made, our next step is to cut our equilateral triangles from each strip set. You can use an acrylic equilateral triangle ruler if you have one, or if you don't have one, you can make your own triangle cutting template using Quilter's template plastic or even a cereal box. And if you need a triangle template to follow, you can find that on my blog. You'll find the link below in the description. And if you're using your own homemade template, you will need your acrylic ruler and, of course, your rotary cutter if I haven't already said that. So I'm going to show you both ways. I'm going to show you how to cut using an acrylic ruler and cut using your own homemade template. Either way is fine. All right, the first thing you're going to do is you're going to take one of your strip sets and lay it out on your cutting mat. You're going to line it up as best you can with the lines on your cutting mat here. Now you can see my strips, this one in particular is a little bit wavy. So though I'm trying to line it up with this line on my cutting mat here, it's not quite lining up exactly. So what I'm really looking at is I'm looking at all of the lines to be as consistently horizontally parallel as I can, knowing that there's a little bit of variation in my homemade strip set here, and that's okay. All right, so if you happen to have an equilateral acrylic ruler, this is what you're going to do. You are going to line up one of the lines on your ruler with the base of the strip set. And if it helps, you can put like washi tape or masking tape to give you a visual cue like I've done. So I've just lined up one of the lines here and I've put my washi tape here. So I'm lining up the base of my triangle, this line on my equilateral triangle ruler, and I'm scooching my triangle over as far as it can go until I get to the selvage edge here. So I don't want to include the selvage in my strip triangle here. So once I have everything lined up, then I am going to cut. So you're going to cut that way. If you are using my cutting template here, you're going to line up the base of your triangle. So line up the cutting template with the base of the strip set. And then you might notice that you've got some excess fabric here. So anytime I have excess fabric, I want to have that excess fabric at the tip of my triangle as opposed to the base of my triangle. So I've lined up the base of my triangle template ruler with the strip set here. And then what you're going to do is you don't use your template as a ruler. Instead, you can overlay your acrylic ruler here, and you're going to line up the 1/4 inch line on your acrylic ruler with that stitching line on the template, and then you can cut like that. And then this is excess fabric, but it's not usable, so I'm going to throw that away. All right, and then my next step is I'm going to flip my entire strip set over. Because I'm right-handed, this is going to help me keep cutting with my right hand, not across my body. I'm going to repeat the process of lining everything up. So keeping everything as lined up as I can on this horizontal. I flipped over my ruler so it's upside down, and I've lined up the base of my ruler or my template with the edge of that strip set here, and then I've lined up the edge of the template or the ruler with that edge that I just cut. And then once you have those two things lined up, then you can cut. And here's what it would look like if you're using your own homemade cutting template here. So you're going to line up the base of your ruler here. And remember, I still have a little bit of extra on top because this template here is blended. So there's a little extra here. So I've lined up the base and I've lined up the edge of what I've just cut. And then I'm placing my acrylic ruler over everything. And I'm lining up the 1/4 inch line on my ruler with the stitching line I marked on my template. And then I am going to cut. And we have our first triangle. All right, so you are going to repeat this process. You're going to flip over your triangle, line up the base of the triangle with the edge of the strip set, line up the edge of the fabric you just cut with your triangle, and cut another triangle. All right, so you're just going to keep repeating this process to keep cutting your triangles. This is going to give you triangles that are alternating in color. So you can see that the darker teal is at the base of this triangle while it's on the tip here. And that's going to be the key to our design. So keep cutting your triangles, whichever way you decide to use, whether you're using your own homemade template with your quilter's ruler over it, or if you happen to have your own acrylic equilateral ruler. Either way is fine. Just be as consistent as possible. It's more important to be consistent than it is to be perfect here. So just stay consistent with whatever way you decide to use. And then as you're cutting, you might start to notice that you can't line up the base of your triangle ruler with the edge that you just cut. So here is what I do when I see that happening. So I've lined up the base here. And there's a little bit of extra fabric. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut. And then I'm going to clean up the edge that was a little bit too big, that didn't fit. And then here's a little bonus for you. If you get to the edge of your strip set and you have a little bit of extra fabric, you could be able to save it as a strip set. So what I am doing now is I'm lining up my 2.5 inch line on my acrylic ruler with that edge of the fabric, and it's going to give me this little strip set. And this could make for a super fun binding someday. It's some extra fabric that we can use, so I thought I'd show you what you can do with it. And then you can throw this away. Repeat the process to make 91 total triangles. If you're making your quilt just like my quilt, you'll make 27 olive triangles, 36 turquoise triangles, and 28 blue triangles. All right, once you have your triangles all cut, the real fun begins. So over on your design surface, you can begin to lay out your triangles to create different pathways of color. So I'm in my design software now. If you're curious, I use Adobe Illustrator, and I'm over in my design software because I wanted to show you just a few different design ideas to help get you started. Now, for my design, I think I followed this one in purple here pretty closely. And then, of course, if you want to use different color groupings that are not monochromatic, like my teal version that I'm demoing here, here's another idea with the pink, purple, and teal. And then you could make several quilts just by following this geometric mid-century modern blob. I don't know what to call it. I really love the look of this kind of blob amoeba looking thing here. So you could definitely have a play with that and incorporate more negative space in the background here. So that'd be super fun. And then you could do something more stripey like this version here that I've started. And let's see, there's something else you could do here if you were to just make, oh, that'd be kind of fun. These are kind of like molehills here. So you could do something like that. That's really fun, actually. Or you could do what I was originally thinking of was to just to create like colorful hexagons here. So yeah, so those are just a few ideas. I don't want to keep you at the computer too much longer because I want you to take your triangles and start playing. But this is your chance to really use my idea and put your own spin on it. So have fun. Or if you'd rather, you can always follow my design layout. Here's what I ended up with. So if you love my design, you can take a screenshot of my design layout. And of course, you can visit the linked blog tutorial for the complete quilt layout photo. I'll probably have a download for you. And of course, I've got more inspiration over on the linked blog. Once you have all your triangles laid out the way you want, it's time to start assembling your Pathways quilt. So to assemble your Pathways quilt, you'll do it in stages. First, you'll sew the triangles into rows, and then you'll sew the rows together to complete your Pathways quilt. So as you assemble your pathways, you'll be sewing 3 different types of joins. So the first type of join is where the triangles dead end into each other. So looking at this stripy triangle, it dead ends into this type of triangle. So that's the first type of join you'll be working with. The second type of join is where there is a turn. So the stripes are turning here, right? And then the third type of join you'll be working with is where your triangles create stripes. And just as a heads up, the stripe joins are the more challenging. So as we go through the demo, I'll show you exactly how to get these so your stripes line up very nicely like these. And then the turning join and the dead end join are super simple. So I found the stripe pairs to be more challenging, but I will walk you through the exact steps so your stripes line up very nicely. All right, in this segment, I'm going to walk you through how to sew the triangles into rows. So I'll be sewing my top row with you. So first off, to sew your rows, we need to first sew our triangles into pairs. So we're going to start with the easiest pairs. So the easiest pairs are the dead end pairs and the pairs where there is a turn. So let's start with the dead end pair. So taking a dead end pair here, I'm going to put them right sides together and I'm going to line up the tip of the triangle here and then the tip of the triangle, and then I've got this blunted edge here. So for sewing triangles into pairs, these triangles, these equilateral triangles, you're just gonna lay them on top of each other. We don't need to stagger these pairs typically. All right, so even though there's nothing to match here, I am gonna add some pins just to keep everything from moving. So I'm gonna pin the beginning, and I'm gonna pin the end, and then I'm going to pin somewhere in the middle. And again, I don't need to match anything, but this is just going to keep anything from moving around. So now that I've got everything pinned for this dead end pair, I'm going to take this to my sewing machine and I'm going to stitch it. So over at my machine, I've got my scant 1/4 inch foot on, and I'm just going to stitch this triangle pair with a scant 1/4 inch seam. All right, I've got this triangle pair stitched up, and I just wanted to show you what it looks like before I press it. Next, you'll want to press your pear. And when you're sewing your triangle pairs into rows, you're going to be pressing your seams in opposite directions. So for my top row, I'm going to be pressing towards this stripy triangle. So when you're pressing, you're going to first press to set the seam. And then you're going to open up your seam and finger press here. And then to finish pressing, you're going to take your iron and just press. And as you're pressing these triangles in any triangle quilt, really, you want to take care to press by lifting your iron up and down and avoiding any back and forth motion. And then if you like, you can add some starch. I'm using Mary Ellen's Best Press. And then I'll let my seam cool underneath a wooden clapper. All right, so that's how you sew a dead end pair together. Now let's do another easy pair, the turning pair. So if you are sewing the turning triangles together, it's really easy. You're just going to put these right sides together and then line up the seams. Okay, so we're lining these pairs up. So I'm going to line up the beginning. So just line up those two tips of your triangles together like so. And pin, and then pin the ending. So we've got two blunted tip triangles here. So we're just going to line up those blunted tip triangles together. So pin that. And then we need to line up the seams here. But these are really easy. You're just going to line these up. You can use your open seams here and here. Just make sure they're lined up and then pin them in place. So I'm lining these guys up here. And then I'm going to line these seams up here and pin. And then if you have any excess fabric here, you see there's a little bubble here. You might want to add another pin. And what I do is I just kind of divide the fabric equally. So there's equal amounts of fabric in between each pin. And that'll be fine. All right. And once you have your triangle pair pinned, it is time to sew. So here is my sewn pair together, my pair sewed together, sewn together. So take out the pins. And then because we match some seams, I like to just open up the unit and just make sure I'm happy with how everything matched together. So it's not perfect, but I'm happy with it. It's almost perfect. So it's good enough. And then you want to press your triangle pair. So I'm pressing my seams that way. So press. So that's how you sew the turning joins together. So let's tackle the most challenging join, which are these stripy joins. So just as in the other triangles, we're going to put these right sides together. And then for me, what was happening is normally I would line up the tips of the triangles, but that didn't work for me. And I'm not sure if I made a mistake or if it's just the nature of sewing with these jelly roll strips, but this is how I end up joining these stripes. So what I do is instead of lining up the points here, I'm lining up the stripes. And for me, that means I need to stagger my joins just a little bit. So for me, I staggered my triangles by about a 1/4 inch. I was able to use my seam allowances and just line up these center seam allowances. So for this one, let's look at this one as an example. I am using the seam allowance on top, this one on the left here, where my thumb's kind of twiddling it right here. And then on the bottom, I used the seam allowance on the right. And what I did is I lined up these seam allowances here. So zooming in a little bit more closely so you can see what I did, I lined up the seam allowance on the left for the top with the seam allowance on the right on the bottom triangle. And then I pinned them together. So let's repeat the process for the other joins. So I'm using the seam allowance on the left side for the triangle on the top and the seam allowance on the right for the bottom. And I'm lining those up and then pinning. So for the last one here, for the seam allowance on the top, I'm using the left and then lining that up with the right seam allowance on the bottom and then pinning that. So here's how I've got everything pinned. I had to stagger my triangles just a little bit, but I was able to use the seam allowances to help me stagger. So you can see that for my triangle, it's not quite lined up here, and it's not quite lined up at the bottom side either, but that's okay. I found that it's better to pin the stripes so that they match. And then we'll be able to fudge the beginning and the end a little bit when we're making the rest of the quilt. Okay, so once you have everything pinned for the stripe pairs, we can sew these together now. All right, so I've got this pair all sewn. So now our next step is to press. But before I press, I want to make sure I'm happy with the way these joined. Yeah, so that works really well for me. Just by staggering these triangles just by that 1/4 of an inch using the seam allowance here, I am very happy with how these stripes line up. So lining up these stripes are a little bit more tricky. I had to stagger my triangles, but as you can see, it's pretty straightforward once you know the trick. All right, so I'm going to press these. All right, so I just showed you how to sew the triangles into pairs. We started with the easiest ones, the dead end pairs, the turn pairs, and then the stripe pairs. So now you know how to sew all these triangles into pairs. So finish sewing the pairs together for your row, and then we'll sew the pairs together to finish the row. So I'm going to finish sewing my pairs together, and I'll be right back. All right, and then once you have all of your pairs sewn together, your next step is to sew the pairs together to complete your row. So I'm going to show you how to sew your pairs together. So before we sew our pairs together, we just want to take a look and see if there's anything that we need to match. So we need our turns to match, and this is a pretty easy join. So all we need to do is put these two triangles right sides together and then line up the stripes. So I've zoomed in so you can see exactly what I'm doing. Now, ideally, I would like the beginning of this triangle to match with this point here and the end to match with this point. But I want to prioritize anything that needs to match here. So I am going to line these stripes up first. So I'm going to follow the same way that I lined up my turn joins when I sewed these pairs together. So I'm just going to line up these stripes here, and these are easy ones, and pin, and then line up and pin, and then line up and pin here. And then once I've got everything lined up and pinned here, then I can pin the beginning and the end. So ideally, as I mentioned earlier, I want this blue triangle tip to line up with the triangle on the bottom. So I can just match those, and that's super easy, and pin. And then over here, I've got a bit of a blunted tip triangle here. And so ideally, I would want that blunted tip to just kind of nest into the flat edge here, but it's not going to. So I'm just going to let it kind of fall as extra fabric, and that'll be fine. All right, so I've got this pair of triangles pinned. So now I'm ready to sew. All right, so at this point, I've got my pairs sewn together, and my next step is to press. But I wanted to just point out, see where this stitching line is right here? It starts right at this divot, and it goes and it keeps going, and then it comes out right at this divot here. So this is the ideal setup. This is what you're looking for in an everything perfect scenario. It doesn't always go like this, but this is what I'm looking for when I'm sewing these triangle pairs into rows. All right, so my next step is to press. And before I press, I just want to make sure I'm happy with how everything joined, just in case I need to redo it. So this looks great. So over at my pressing station, I am still pressing my seams in alternating directions. And so my seams are going this way. So that's the direction I'm going to press. I'm going to press to set the seam here. And then I'm going to finger press. And then I'm going to come through and give it its last final press. And again, as you're pressing any triangle quilt, you want to get in the habit of lifting your iron up and down just to avoid any back and forth motion. That is going to prevent any bias edges from warping. And then if you like, you can shoot it with some starch. I'm using Mary Ellen's Best Press. And then I'm going to let it cool under a wooden clapper. All right, so that is how you sew your triangle pairs together to complete your rows. So I'm going to keep adding my pairs together to complete this top row. And so as I do so, I am lining everything up and I'm prioritizing any stripes that need to match here. All right, so I'm going to finish this up and I will see you back for the next step. I wanted to pop in with a quick tip. Here's what to look for to know that you're sewing your rows correctly. So what I look for when I'm sewing my triangle rows together is I want at least a 1/4 inch seam allowance at these points here. So here's a point and here's a point, and ideally I want at least a 1/4 of an inch. So here's one where it might be a 1/4 of an inch, but it's kind of scant right here. And then looking at the rest of my row, here is another one. This looks great. This is a little bit stingy. I'm not worried about it though, because it's the same color, so it's hard to see. So I don't have a point. If I miss the point, we're not going to see it because it's like the color is the same. So it's not a big deal. And then here it looks good. Here looks good. Here looks good. This one's a little skimpy, but it's fine. This one looks great. And then this one is super skimpy. It's okay. We can't even see it right here, but it's pretty skimpy. And if I zoom in a little bit, maybe you can see how skimpy it is. I've got this point right here and I've got maybe 1/8 of an inch here. It's totally workable, but ideally we want that 1/4 inch right here. So make sure as you're sewing your triangle pairs together, you're getting this 1/4 inch right here. That's going to tell you that you're sewing your pairs together correctly. So now that you have all your triangles sewn into rows, your next step to complete your Pathways quilt is to sew the rows together. And remember, as you join your rows together, you're going to be dealing with 3 types of joins. You've got your dead end joins, you've got your turn joins, and you've got your stripe joins. And the stripe one is the trickiest, but the other 2 are so easy. So in this segment, I'm going to show you how you can sew your rows together. So to show you how to sew the rows together, I've got 2 rows on my workstation here. These are the top 2 rows, and as I show you how to sew these rows together, we'll be dealing with the 3 different types of joins. So right off the bat, we've got a stripey join here, which is our most challenging. We've got a dead end join here, which is super easy. And then we also have a join where our stripes are going to turn. So as I show you how to sew your rows together, we'll be dealing with the 3 different types of joins. Hooray! All right, so your first step is you're going to lay out your rows on your workstation, and then you're just going to make sure you've got the triangles lined up how you want. So starting from left to right here, so I'm just going to look and make sure I've got the right stripes matching. So these will match, these will match, these will match, and everything looks good. I know now I have everything lined up how I want. So just to give you an overview of what we're going to be matching here. So we're going to be matching the points where the triangles meet, of course, and we'll have those throughout. We're also going to be lining up any stripes or the joins I was talking about earlier. All right, so once you know everything is lined up correctly, you can put your rows right sides together and grab your pins. And what we're going to start off with is we're going to start by lining up these points where the triangles will meet. So just to give you an overview of what I do, I kind of peel these to separate and then I walk them together. And once I see that they're lined up, then I can pin. So I'm going to zoom in so you can see that a little bit more clearly. So here's the pin I just added. And then here we want to do the same thing. So we want those 2 points to meet. And this is why we needed that 1/4 inch seam allowance just beyond the point. This one's pretty skimpy, but it's totally workable. And so what I do is I just line these up and I walk them together until they match. Hopefully the seams are nesting. My seams are nesting because the seams on this row are going this way and the seams on the bottom row are going in the opposite direction. All right, so one trick you can do is you can take a pin and you can insert it at the point on top and the point will come out here. And then you can insert the pin where the point is on the bottom. And then you can bring the pieces of fabric together and then pin. So that way you know that they're going to match. So I'm going to go through and I'm going to match all of my points here. And as you get more experience lining up these points, it's going to become easier, but you can use that tip. All right, so at this point, I have all the triangles pinned. Everywhere where these dog ears are sticking up, they're pinned and matched. So the other places I need to line up are the joins. So let's start. This is a turn join. So I am just going to line up the stripes. These are easy. So we'll line up those stripes and pin just to hold them in place. And then I'm going to add a pin at the start just to hold everything in place. Okay, this is a turn join. So I'm going to repeat the process here. Just line these up. And then this one is another turn join. So that's easy. I love those. Love it when it's easy. And then next, this is a dead end join. So that's super easy. I don't have anything to match. So I'm just going to add a pin in the middle just so I don't get too much shifting. And then next, okay, this is the stripey join. This is the most challenging. So I'm going to use my same trick I did earlier when I was sewing the pairs together. I am going to take the seam allowance from the top triangle. I'm going to take the left seam allowance and I'm going to line it up with the bottom seam allowance here. So I'm lining up, I've got the left teal seam allowance on the top, and then on the bottom, I'm going to use the right seam allowance with this aqua fabric, and I'm going to line those up together. So that's going to give me my stagger. And then I'm going to repeat the process with the other 2 stripes. So I'm going to take the top left, which is the aqua, and line it up with the bottom right, which is this pale aqua, maybe gray. I'm going to line those seam allowances up together and pin. And then with the last one, I'm going to take the top, which is on the left, it's the dark teal. And I'm going to line up with the bottom on the right, which is teal. I'm going to line up those seam allowances. That's going to give me my stagger. So I've got my stripe join lined up. And then there's a little bit of extra fabric with the bottom teal. So I'm just going to add another pin to make sure I don't get any puckers. And then I've got another join. This is a dead end join, so that's easy. Nothing to line up. So I'm just going to add one pin in the center just to keep everything straight so it doesn't shift too much. And then this last one is another stripe join. So this is the more challenging one. So I'm going to repeat the process here. So I'm going to take the left seam allowance, the dark one, and I'm going to line it up with the right seam allowance with the teal. Line those up together. And then work my way with the other stripes. So I'm going to take the left stripe, that seam allowance, the teal one, and line it up with the right seam allowance on the bottom, which is the aqua. I'm going to line those seam allowances up. And then this last one, I'm going to line up the left seam allowance on the top with the right seam allowance on the bottom. So the aqua and the gray. I'm going to line those seam allowances up and pin. And then I'm just going to look to see if I have any excess fabric. I've got a little bit of excess fabric here. So I'm going to add another pin just to avoid any puckers. And I think that should do it. I'm just going to add another pin just here, just in case. Okay, at this point, I've got everything pinned. There are a lot of pins, but I want to make sure I get everything nice and lined up. So once you have your rows pinned together, your next step is to sew. Over at my sewing machine, I still have my 1/4 inch foot on. I'm going to stitch a 1/4 inch seam. All right, so at this point, I've got my rows stitched together. I'm going to remove the pin and preview my points. As you're sewing your rows together, here's how to know if you're doing it correctly. So I just finished stitching these rows together. Before pressing, I just want to open up my rows and make sure I'm happy with how the points landed in case I need to redo anything. Now, spoiler alert, I don't usually redo things. I just let it ride. All right, so this point isn't great. It's, it's fine. I'm not going to redo it. These stripes, these look great. This point is fine. Nothing to match here. This looks good. And this looks good. And I missed that. This isn't great here. Maybe I'm going to let this ride, but I might redo this one. So I chopped off my points, and what had happened, this is one of my skimpier seam allowances for my joins. So I had a harder time matching that. Now, if you're looking at your own stripes or your own joins and thinking that you could have done a better job, before you rip it out, I just want to say I love this pattern because the design is so strong that when anyone looks at it, their brains are going to correct the stripes and we're really not going to see it. So before you take the time and rip out anything you're not happy with, just know that other people probably won't be able to tell. So I say, let it ride. All right, so once you have your rows sewn together and you're happy-ish with the results, your next step is to press. You can press however you like. So you can press your seams open or you can press them to the side. Whatever you decide at this point is absolutely fine. So do what's easiest for you. Now, I'm going to press here at my workstation. Normally, this is something I would press at my bigger ironing board, but because I'm here with you, I'm going to be pressing it on this little wool mat here. All right, so your first step is to press to set the seams. And then once you have your seams set, then you can do the actual pressing. So for me, it's easiest to press my seams open. So what I do is I will put my row pretty side down, and then I am going to finger press these rows. And then I'm going to chase my finger down the seam as I press the seams open with my actual iron. And then, because there's so many seams, I have to go back and kind of correct any seams that flipped. All right, and then once you press your seams on the back side, flip it over to the pretty side and press. So as I go, I will be using some starch. I'm using Mary Ellen's Best Press. And then as I finish pressing, I will put my wooden clapper and let these seams cool so that they cool nice and flat. All right, so at this point I have sewn 2 rows together. And so that is how you sew the rows together. So take this process and repeat it until all of your rows are sewn together to finish assembling your Pathways quilt. Ta-da! Your quilt top is done. Hooray! Now, if you like, you can square up your quilt top or leave the uneven edges for a fun and floppy twist. So if you want to square up your quilt top, here is how you'll do it. So lay out your finished quilt top on a cutting surface, and then with a longer quilting ruler, we are going to trim away these floppy edges. And what I'm going to look for is I am going to line up the 1/4 inch line on my ruler with these points on the side. So zooming in a little bit tighter so you can see, I've lined up the 1/4 inch line on my ruler with this point here. And then I'm going to do the same thing over here. So lining up the 1/4 inch line, my ruler, with that point. And so once I have these 2 points lined up with the 1/4 inch line on my ruler, then I am going to trim and get rid of the flops, the angular flops. And then I'm going to repeat the process throughout the entire side. So lining up my ruler, the 1/4 inch line on my ruler with this point here that I already trimmed. And then this point as well. Once they're all lined up, then you can trim, and then one more. So line up the 1/4 inch mark with on your ruler with that point right there. Here, there's not a point, but I'm lining up the flat part of my ruler. So I've got this 90-degree edge here, and then this is lined up. And so I've got a nice 90-degree edge on this corner. And that is how you trim the side of your Pathways quilt. So I'm going to repeat the process on the other side, and then my Pathways quilt will be finished. Now, if you're wondering how to quilt your new Pathways finish, I quilted mine in straight lines on my domestic machine. They're kind of organic lines. You can tell they're different widths here. They're not perfect. And I just followed the pathways. And then the thread I chose my favorite teal thread by Aurifil. And then I used a 40 weight, so the thread is a little bit thicker. And if you're curious, the color is 4093. All right, that is how to make the Pathways Jelly Roll quilt pattern. Thank you so much for watching this tutorial, and I hope that you enjoy making the Pathways quilt as much as I did. Now, if you know any quilty friends who also love jelly roll patterns, please feel free to share this pattern with them and enjoy. Happy quilting!